Alright, we are at the end of the Vietnam War. We are at the Battle of Manhattan. The High King DeFeel is dead. The sword Caliburn is missing. And no one knows where it is. And everyone is looking for it. Because everyone kind of assumes that whoever finds the sword can name themselves High King. Now, as this is all going on, in an effort to spare some of the younger Arcadians the horror of war, the Grand Bard of the Fae, known as True Thomas, appoints himself guardian of a small group of young Shi. Now, when we say young Shi, what we're actually looking at is when the Shi came into the world and supplanted themselves into human bodies, some of them, rather than taking adult bodies, some of them found their way into the bodies of children. And so they were actually having to grow up. And they do still have that human experience because they have to keep within it. And because their fey mind is to an extent held back by the childlike body that they take. So he's taken a group of these young Shi as his wards. And he's taken them into upstate New York and protected them through the course of the war. Following High King Daphros' death, Lyros starts to have trouble with some of his own troops. Some of the more violent troops, the Redcaps especially, start to disobey orders. New Year's Eve 1973, Thomas found out that a motley of Redcaps were making their way towards his location, intent on slaying all of the Shi there, child or not. Trying to rescue his wards, Thomas saw that the only way out of the situation was to leave his home, bring them back into New York, and hide basically under their noses in plain sight. Now, it seemed to be a good plan at the time. Lots and lots of mortals around to kind of hide among. But unfortunately, just before midnight, a group of Redcaps spotted them in the city and started to chase them. The Grand Bard called his wards to stand behind him while he attempted to fend off the attackers. While this was going on, unnoticed to both sides, one of the young Shi boys, by the name of David Ardrey, snuck away and found himself in an alleyway nearby. As the battle between Thomas and the Redcaps commenced, David felt a surge of glamour and almost heard a voice calling out for him. He followed it, and just as the bell of New Year's sounded, David returned to help his mentor, wielding Caliban. As David returned, True Thomas spun to his ward and announced, "Behold, you look upon your king." Frightened and confused by the appearance of the sword, the Redcaps fled. Now, a lot of things went on from here, and I'm going to get a little bit more abstract, because with the more modern history, I might end up taking some more liberties for the purposes of my own game. But True Thomas continued to mentor David, along with his sister Morrowind. They departed towards what was thought to be the relative safety of one of the She nobles known as Queen Mab. She was the ruler of the Kingdom of Apples. Basically, they knew that it was going to be necessary to get support for the new king, as they were calling him. And they began to make headway with both the Seelie and the Unseelie. They went to Queen Mab to begin with, as I said. When they got there, though, they found out that the queen already knew that David had the sword. But she turned them away. She said, "I want nothing to do with it." As she dismissed them, a shining griffin materialized, shielding David with its wings. And it was in that moment that Thomas cited the words of the prophecy given to them decades before by the Dreaming. The son of the griffin and the sword that was lost shall come together in the apple bower. Now, realizing that this was a symbolism of the dream anointing David as king, Mab relented and proclaimed him the High King of the Fame. Now, a bit more time passed as David worked to bring the groups together, to bring them, to get them speaking. He eventually got the Arcadian She working together under his rule, and then he finally managed to start making headway into a treaty with the commoners, and what he referred to as the Treaty of Concord continued to confirm the She's right to rule, but it also recognized the efforts of commoners in service of the Dreaming throughout the interregnum, and he created the Parliament of Dreams, which basically is a council of commoners who, while they're not able to make decrees, can advise the nobles on the wishes of the people. Very much, if you look at the British system, they have the House of Lords and they have the Parliament, and and then they have the Queen, and then they have the Prime Minister. But basically, you have these groups that are representative of the people. They don't necessarily have power themselves, but they have the power to speak for the people. He also created a system of ennoblement. So the ability to take a commoner and to grant them a noble rank. And this was done for a number of the more prominent commoner leaders as a show of faith. They were made ennobled. And thinking back to what I was saying about the arts and about Sovereign, what I think I might actually do for my game is I would allow commoners to learn Sovereign only if they had been ennobled. I think that makes the most sense. Now, from here, David falls in love, as he would, of course, and he and his new bride begin a tour of the kingdom. They get into her family's territory, and the king vanishes. Of course, you kind of expect that. Nothing's going to go too smoothly, is it? People blame her. She blames other people. It becomes a massive mess again. And once again, the Changeling are left without a High King. On the same night that David vanished, Caliburn, this sword, materializes for someone called Sif. Now, Sif is a changeling. He is a storyteller. He is an advisor. He was a commoner. But he brings the sword along with a vision that basically says the king is not dead. He is missing, but he is not dead. And actually he is ennobled on the spot and given the mission of finding the king. There is a lot of political infighting while the king is missing. His sister wants to rule, his wife wants to rule, a couple of the prominent commoner leaders think it's time for a commoner to rule. And there's a lot of bickering and a lot of infighting. Debates in the Parliament of Dreams, deadlock in the Parliament of Dreams, and then eventually the Parliament of Dreams is dissolved. Now, there is some other history in the book, but for the purposes of the game that I'm going to be running, I'm not going to go into that, because I'm going to be making use of some alternate history. So, as we stand now, the High King vanished in the 90s. He has not returned. The courts are split. There is no High King. There are multiple kings and queens of their own domains.